I'm the shareholder who introduced the proxy resolution involving Berkshire Hathaway's divestment of PetroChina. PetroChina is implicated in the genocide in Darfur, Sudan. I want to thank you for allowing us to speak to this resolution. In many countries, it would be impossible for us to do so, but we are indeed fortunate to live in a country where we can express our opinion without fear or without recrimination. Before my husband formally presents the resolution, I want to explain to you why I have introduced it. My family is no stranger to genocide. My grandparents were murdered in 1941 in the Nazi genocide, as were other members of my family. I will never forget the despair my father expressed when my aunt, who was released from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, sent him a letter telling him what happened to his family. It deeply affected him for the rest of his life, and I was raised to believe that genocide should never, ever again happen. Never again. The world was silent when my grandparents were murdered, but genocide has continued. In the genocide in Cambodia, the world was silent. In the genocide in Bosnia, the world was silent until late in the slaughter. The world was again silent in the horrible genocide in Rwanda. How many times must we say, never again? Now, there is the first genocide of the 21st century in Darfur. 2.5 million civilians have been driven from their homes. More than 400,000 have been killed, and 1,600 villages have been destroyed. Berkshire Hathaway can play a role in ending this slaughter by divesting in PetroChina, as we'll shortly describe. As an exemplar of both business ethics and personal integrity, your support of divestment will send a signal to China and to the Sudan that there are costs to continuing this destruction, and it will lead other corporations to follow your ethical actions. Genocide is never a good investment.
Wesco does not control Berkshire Hathaway. We can have lots of overlap of management and everything. Berkshire Hathaway controls Wesco. If a shareholder of Wesco were to complain to the management of Wesco, which is analogous to PetroChina, about the fact that, let's say, that Berkshire bought his car or any other activity or anything I was doing personally, they would have no ability to control me. If somebody complained to Berkshire about something that was going on at Wesco, we could certainly introduce action. So it flows downward. The overlap means nothing. I mean, obviously the Chinese government controls PetroChina. They own 88% of the stock. We control Mytech. We own 90% of the stock. We control Wesco. We own 80% of the stock. We can tell Mytech what to do. We can tell Wesco what to do. But Mytech and Wesco cannot tell Berkshire what to do. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding on that. The Chinese government controls 32 of the largest 33 publicly owned companies in China. And the Chinese government, in effect, is in charge of all of those companies. The Chinese government does business with the Sudan. PetroChina does not. PetroChina in no way tells the Chinese government what to do. And we've seen evidence of that in a lot of ways. So it seems to me it's backwards. If it was PetroChina following a policy that the Chinese government disagreed with, believe me, there would be a change in a hurry. We have no disagreement at all about what's going on in Darfur. There's two questions. One is PetroChina influenced the Chinese government. And secondly, if we don't agree with what the Chinese government is doing, should we sell our stock in PetroChina? The people here who have come, who own stock in Berkshire Hathaway, have obviously made the choice, even though they disagree with what our policy is, to continue as shareholders, and I agree with them with that 100%. And we, in turn, elect to continue to hold our shares in PetroChina because we have no disagreement with what PetroChina is doing. If there's a disagreement, it may be with what the Chinese government is doing. Now, in terms of what the Chinese government is doing, we've heard talk about divestiture by China. If the Chinese left the Sudan tomorrow, 400,000 barrels of oil would be being produced, a good bit with the money that China has invested into Sudan. You can't take the assets, you can't take the refinery, you can't take pipelines, you can't take the oil out of it. They could sell it to other people who are doing business in the Sudan. They could sell it to the Sudanese government. But believe me, they would probably sell it very cheap. The Sudanese government would get a bargain, or the Sudanese government might very well renegotiate terms in their favor if they allowed a third party to buy. Believe me, they would be in a position assuming they could effect the transfer. And I think there's a lack of understanding of what really would happen if China said tomorrow, we're going to take our interest away from our activities in Sudan. They would have to sell them, or they'd have to give them up one way or the other. And like I say, I think the Sudanese government would probably end up better off financially if they had a half-decent advisor in the question than they are presently. I might mention one other thing which is kind of interesting in this. We buy currently about $250 billion worth more of goods from China than we sell to them, and we give them little pieces of paper in exchange. And we say to them, we want your goods, and you should work hard and send us your goods, and we'll send you these little pieces of paper called American dollars. 2 years ago, China wanted to use some of those American dollars, we'd use their goods, to want to buy a company called Unocal. Unocal was a low-tier U.S. company. The majority of their production of oil and gas came from outside the United States, a substantial majority. It came from places like Thailand, Indonesia, and the Chinese wanted to buy that company. And by a vote of 395 to 18, the U.S. House of Representatives sent their message to President Bush that it would be against the national interest to let this company be sold, which, as I say, produced very little oil and gas in the United States, got most of it from the rest of the world. So, in effect, we snubbed the Chinese in a big way on something important to them, energy. And I might mention that we import perhaps 4 times as much energy from all the countries around the world as the Chinese do, even though they have 4 times the population. So we have, in a sense, told the Chinese a couple of years ago, don't even think about buying this small U.S. company with a fair amount of production abroad to satisfy your energy needs. And I think it's understandable to some extent that the Chinese are looking for energy around the world just as we have for the last century. They are buying significant amounts of oil from Sudan. They put money in there, and they are going to buy they're going to buy that 400,000. They're not taking the whole 400,000 barrels a day from the Sudan, but they're taking significant amounts. They're going to buy that oil in the world market. That oil is going to get produced. Revenue is going to flow to the Sudan. The question is how much the Sudanese keep themselves and how much gets dispersed to the Chinese because of the investment they've made. So I see no effect whatsoever in Berkshire Hathaway trying to tell the Chinese government how to conduct their business. I agree 100% with the fact that what is happening in the Sudan should not be happening. And there are other parts of the world where say that same situation may exist, although not to the same degree. But I don't think it's proper for us to divest our shares in PetroChina. They would be sold to somebody else. I think the proponents of the motion probably would like the idea that the price of the stock would go down. Well, we don't sell stocks, basically to try and drive them down in price. We might sell PetroChina if it went up enough, but we would not be selling it to try and drive down the price, because all that would be doing would be giving a bargain to somebody else who is buying the stock of PetroChina. It doesn't change the funds available to them at all. One of the speakers mentioned the amount of money that goes from PetroChina up to its parent. Well, money from Wesco comes up to Berkshire from our subsidiaries. That's the nature of having a major ownership in a subsidiary. You get money from MyTech, you get money from the Nebraska Furniture Mart, which we own 80% of. But that really has nothing to do, in my view at least, it has nothing to do with the fact that it is China that has a policy in respect to being partners in Sudan, and it is not PetroChina at all. Selling our stock would not change one thing. If we would have any communications, it's a practical matter, the communication should be with the Chinese government, and actually people here have had a chance, because we have a lot of media here, they've had a chance to express their views to the Chinese government. Believe me, unless the government expressing PetroChina means nothing. I mean, the PetroChina is controlled by the Chinese government, and they are not. If you were an official of PetroChina, you are not going to tell the Chinese government what to do. They are going to tell you what to do. Charlie?
Well, the issue also is China is a rapidly rising nuclear power, and who should decide how the federal government or how the Americans should react to China? There's a lot to be said for letting the policy flow through the U.S. government instead of sort of a vigilante effort of various citizens. And I would also point out that there's a lot wrong all over the earth, and there's a lot of cruelty, and there always has been, and there'll always be a lot of oil produced in a lot of lands with a lot of cruelty, and nobody's in favor of cruelty, but there's a limit to how much you can fix. And so I'm very skeptical of the idea that Berkshire should become an instrument of setting United States policies vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, Charlie and I have our own views, for example, on reproductive freedom, but we don't have a Berkshire Hathaway policy on reproductive freedom, nor do we finance from Berkshire Hathaway funds, the funds of our shareholders. We do not finance any activities that relate to our personal beliefs, although we may obviously fund them by ourselves or speak out on them by themselves, but we do not have a Berkshire Hathaway funding just because we believe that women should have the right to choose or questions of that sort.
I think reasonable minds can disagree on these subjects. At Berkshire, there's all kinds of businesses we won't buy and control individually, but we're willing to own stock in the same businesses. Is that the correct moral line to draw? I don't know. We do our best, and we make the decisions, and we make the calls.
I wonder really whether when the Unocal question was being determined, here were the Chinese to whom we'd given lots of little tickets in exchange for taking their goods, and they came along with a perfectly decent offer to the shareholders of Unocal, $18.5 billion. They wanted to buy a little more oil and gas production around the world, and the U.S. Congress overwhelmingly said, this is a terrible thing, and we want the United States to oppose it, and we want it sold to Chevron for less money. And I really don't recall a lot of people speaking up on behalf of the Chinese right to buy oil companies over here, just like we bought oil companies around the world for many decades. So to the extent that they may feel themselves somewhat alienated from the rest of the world in this respect, I think we've actually contributed our share. Charlie?
Well, another thing in the complexity of life, the woman who lost her family to the Holocaust, we clobbered the people that committed that genocide by joining genocidal Joe Stalin. These issues are complicated.